I, 28F, stood beside my new husband, Mark, 30M, feeling the warmth of his hand in mine. The reception hall was filled with soft light and the gentle hum of our friends and family talking. It was perfect. Everything I had ever dreamed of for my wedding day. My dress felt like a cloud, and Mark's smile was the only thing I could see. We had just finished our first dance. Now it was time for the toasts. My father went first, making a sweet, tearful speech that had my mother dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Then my maid of honor shared a funny story from our college days. Finally, Mark's mother, Sharon, stood up. She tapped her glass with a spoon, and a respectful silence fell over the room. She was an elegant woman, always perfectly dressed, always in control. Her smile was wide, but it never quite reached her eyes. I had always felt a little on edge around her, but I told myself it was just nerves. I wanted my mother-in-law to like me. "I would like to propose a toast," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "To my son Mark and his beautiful bride, Chloe." She raised her glass and people murmured their approval. "Mark, from the moment I first held you in my arms, I knew you were special," she continued, her eyes fixed on him. "You are the most beautiful baby, and you have grown into a remarkable man. I am so proud to be your mother." Mark squeezed my hand, a happy, slightly embarrassed look on his face. This was the part of the speech where she was supposed to say something about me, about welcoming me to the family. I waited, holding my breath. "I am so happy for my son," she said, her voice ringing with finality. She paused, and the room waited with me. But that was it. She did not mention me again. She did not welcome me. She just toasted her son. It was a small thing, a tiny slight, but it felt like a cold stone dropping into my stomach. I forced a smile, telling myself not to be so sensitive. Just as she was about to take a sip from her champagne flute, a commotion started at the back of the room. A woman's voice, raw and loud, cut through the quiet. "He is not your son." Heads turned. I saw an older woman, her hair gray and messy, pushing her way past a confused waiter. She wore a simple, worn coat, and her face was lined with a deep and desperate sorrow. Her eyes were locked on Sharon. Sharon's smile froze on her face. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her glass. The old woman took another step forward, pointing a trembling finger. "You stole him. He's my son, you stole him." A gasp went through the room. Mark dropped my hand and took a protective step in front of his mother. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. "What is this? Get her out of here." Two of Mark's cousins started moving toward the woman, but she did not back down. She looked past them, her gaze finding Mark's. Her expression softened, filled with a pain so deep it made my own chest ache. "My baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My sweet boy, I never stopped looking for you." Sharon finally found her voice. "Security!" she shrieked, her composure shattering. "Get this crazy woman out of my son's wedding. She is a stalker. She has been harassing our family for years." The old woman shook her head wildly. "No, it is not true. She is the liar. She was the nurse who told me you died. She stole you from me." The room erupted into chaos. People were standing up, whispering, pointing. I felt like I was in a dream, a nightmare I could not wake up from. Mark was yelling at the security guards to hurry up. His father, Robert, a quiet and nervous man, was trying to calm Sharon down, but she was hysterical, sobbing and calling the woman a monster. I just stood there, frozen. I looked at the old woman's face, at the honest, gut-wrenching grief etched there. Then I looked at Sharon, whose performance felt a little too loud, a little too practiced. And in that moment, a tiny, cold seed of doubt was planted in my heart. The security guards finally reached the old woman and took her by the arms. She did not fight them. She just kept her eyes on Mark as they led her away. "I have proof," she cried out, her voice fading as they pulled her through the doors. "My name is Alara. Find me, please find me." Then she was gone. The heavy doors swung shut, leaving behind a stunned, silent room. The wedding, my perfect day, was ruined. But that was not the thought that consumed me. All I could think about was the look on that woman's face and the chilling possibility that she was telling the truth. The rest of the reception was a blur. The band stopped playing. People started leaving in hushed groups, casting sympathetic or curious glances our way. My parents came over and hugged me, asking if I was okay. I told them I was fine, but my voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Mark was fuming. He spent the next hour with his arm around his mother, who was putting on a brave face, dabbing at her eyes and accepting condolences from the few remaining guests. "I am so sorry, Chloe," she said to me, her voice trembling convincingly. "For that horrible scene. For our special day being ruined by a delusional woman." "Who was she?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I told you," she said, her tone sharpening slightly. "A stalker. She lost a child years ago and had a breakdown. She fixated on me, on my family. She has done this before, shown up at our house, at Mark's school events. It is a police matter." I looked at Mark. "You never mentioned a stalker before." He ran a hand through his hair, his face tight with stress. "I did not want to worry you, honey. We thought it was over. She has not shown up in years. I cannot believe she chose today, of all days." His explanation made sense on the surface, but it did not explain the feeling I had. The feeling that something was deeply wrong. I remembered the woman's words. "She was the nurse who told me you died." It was so specific. Too specific for a random delusion. We went back to our hotel suite that night, but the celebratory mood was gone. The room was filled with flowers and a bottle of champagne on ice, but it felt like a funeral home. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my wedding dress, while Mark paced back and forth. "I am going to call the police first thing in the morning," he said, clenching his fists. "I am getting a restraining order. She will never come near my mother again." "Mark," I said softly, "what if she is not crazy?" He stopped pacing and stared at me. "What? Chloe, what are you talking about? You saw her? She is insane." "I do not know," I said, shaking my head. "There was something about her, the way she looked at you, and what she said about your mom being a nurse." "My mom was a nurse," he snapped. "So what? This woman probably found that out somehow." "Stalkers do that. They dig up information to make their stories seem real." "But why you? Why your family?" I pressed. "Who knows why crazy people do what they do?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet room. He immediately looked sorry. He came over and sat beside me, taking my hands. "Look, I am sorry. I am just so angry. This was supposed to be our night. Our perfect night. And my mom, she is a mess." "I know," I said. "I just have a bad feeling." "It is because of the shock," he said, stroking my hair. "Let's just forget about it. Let's not let that woman ruin anything else for us. Please, Chloe. For me. Let it go." He wanted me to let it go. He wanted me to forget the raw agony in that woman's eyes and the cold, practiced denial in his mother's. He wanted me to pretend that the foundation of his life, and now my life, had not just been shaken by a screaming woman in a worn coat. I looked at my new husband, the man I had promised to love and trust, and I nodded. "Okay, Mark," I said. "Okay." But I knew I was lying. I could not let it go. I had to know the truth, no matter what it cost me. The next morning, I woke up alone. A note on the pillow beside me said Mark had gone to his parents' house to check on his mother. "Be back soon. Love you." I stared at the note, a cold knot forming in my stomach. He was choosing his mother's side without a second thought. Of course he was. She was his mother. But his immediate dismissal of my concerns stung. I got out of bed and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. The sun was shining, but everything felt gray. I thought about the woman, Alara. Find me, she had said. How could I even do that? I did not have a last name. I did not know where she lived. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was my best friend and maid of honor, Sarah. Hey, she said, her voice full of concern. Are you okay? I am so sorry about what happened last night. It was insane. I do not know what I am, I confessed. Is Mark with you? She asked. No, he went to see Sharon, I said. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Chloe, I have to tell you something, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. After they dragged that woman out, I saw her in the lobby. She was talking to one of the hotel security guards. I overheard her give him her full name and address. She was asking him to give it to you. My heart started pounding. What? Did he? No, Sarah said. Mark's dad, Robert, came over and told the guard not to. He said she was a dangerous person and that the police were handling it. He took the piece of paper with her information and tore it up. I sank onto the bed, my mind racing. Robert had actively stopped her from contacting me. That was not the action of a man dealing with a harmless, delusional person. That was the action of a man with something to hide. But, Sarah continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The guard felt bad for her. He saw me watching. After Robert left, he came over and told me her name and the town she lives in. He had memorized it. I wrote it down. I shot up from the bed. Sarah, you are amazing. What is it? She told me the name, Alara Vance, and the town, a small sleepy place about 2 hours away called Northwood. What are you going to do, Chloe? Sarah asked, her voice cautious. I am going to Northwood, I said, my decision solidifying with each word. I have to talk to her. Are you sure that is a good idea? Mark will be furious. Mark wants me to pretend last night never happened, I said, a new hardness in my voice. He wants me to just accept Sharon's story, but I cannot do that. If he will not look for the truth, I will. Be careful, Sarah warned. If Sharon is hiding something this big, she could be dangerous. I will be, I promised. After I hung up, I got dressed quickly. I did not pack a bag. I did not want Mark to know I was gone for long. I wrote a quick note, saying I needed some air and went for a walk. It was a weak lie, but it was the best I could do. The drive to Northwood was long and quiet. My mind was a whirlwind of questions and fears. What if Mark was right? What if Alara Vance was just a mentally ill woman who would drag me into her delusions? But what if she was not? What if my husband of less than 24 hours was the stolen child of a heartbroken mother? What did that make Sharon? A monster. And what did it make Robert? Her accomplice. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I had to know. Northwood was a small town, the kind with a single main street and a lot of old houses. I did not have an exact address for Alara, so I started at the town hall, hoping to find her in a public record. The clerk was a friendly woman who looked at me over her glasses. Alara Vance? She said, tapping at her computer. Yes, I know Alara. Sweet woman. Had a hard life. She lives in the small cottage at the end of Oak Street, number 212. Thank you, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. Thank you so much. Oak Street was lined with big, old trees. Number 212 was a tiny blue house with a garden in the front that was a little overgrown. It looked humble and sad. I parked my car and walked up the cracked pavement to the front door. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I about to ruin my life? Was I about to destroy my marriage by digging into a secret that was not mine to uncover? Then I thought of the wedding. Sharon's dismissive toast. Robert tearing up the note. Mark telling me to just let it go. They were all hiding something. They were a united front, and I was on the outside. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A few moments later, it creaked open. Alara Vance stood there, looking even smaller and more fragile than she had at the reception. She was wearing a simple house dress, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. When she saw me, her eyes widened in disbelief. "You came," she whispered. "I came," I said. "Can I come in? I want to hear your story." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. She opened the door wider and let me into her home. The inside of Alara's house was simple and clean. It smelled faintly of lavender and old books. There were framed photos on every surface, but they were all of the same baby. A beautiful, dark-haired boy with big, curious eyes. It was Mark. I could see it instantly. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his smile. It was undeniably him. "That's him," I said, my voice barely a whisper, pointing to a photo on the mantelpiece. "Yes," Alara said, her hand going to her heart. "My Daniel. That is the name I gave him." She led me to a small, worn sofa, and we sat down. She offered me tea, but I shook my head. I just wanted to listen. "Tell me everything," I urged gently. And so she did. Her story poured out of her, a torrent of grief and injustice held back for 30 years. She told me she was young when she had her son. The father was not in the picture. She was alone, scared, but so happy when her baby was born. He was healthy and strong. She spent 2 days with him in a small private clinic in a town that was a few hours away. On the third day, she said, her voice breaking, a nurse came into my room. Her name was Sharon. She was new. She told me my baby had passed in the night. A sudden illness, she said. My heart it shattered. I listened, my own heart aching for her. I demanded to see him, Alara continued, tears streaming down her face. But she said he had already been taken away. It was clinic policy, she said, to handle things quickly to spare the mother more pain. I was hysterical. I did not believe her, but I was just a scared girl. The doctor came in and confirmed it. He gave me a sedative. When I woke up, they were discharging me. They gave me a death certificate. They told me to go home and grieve. "And you believed them?" I asked softly. "For a while," she admitted. I was in a fog of grief, but something always felt wrong. I never saw my baby. I never got to say goodbye. A few years later, I started trying to find his grave. The clinic told me he had been cremated, as per my wishes, but I never signed any papers for that. I never wished for that. That was when she started digging. She went back to the town where the clinic was. She found out it had been shut down years ago under mysterious circumstances. The doctor who ran it had disappeared. She tried to find the records, but they were gone. I started looking for the nurse, Alara said, her voice hardening. Sharon. I had her last name from her name tag. It took me years. But I hired a private investigator with what little money I had. He found her. She was married, living in the city, and she had a son. A son who was the exact age my Daniel would have been. My blood ran cold. I went to her house, Alara said. I just wanted to see him. I saw them in the yard. The boy, he looked just like the photos of my baby. It was him. I knew it in my soul. I confronted her. She called the police. She told them I was a crazy woman who had lost a child and was projecting onto her family. She had a birth certificate for her son, Mark. She had a story all prepared. Everyone believed her. No one believed me. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. She has done it ever since. Every time I tried to get close to tell someone the truth, she would call the police. She painted me as a dangerous stalker. Eventually, I had to stop. There was a restraining order. I could not go near them. I just watched from a distance. I watched my son grow up in pictures I found online. I saw his school achievements, his graduation, and then I saw his wedding announcement. She choked on a sob. I knew I could not let him get married without trying one more time. I had to tell him. I had to let him know he had a mother who loved him, who never, ever gave up on him. So I came to the wedding. I know I made a scene. I know I ruined your day, and I am so, so sorry for that. But I am not crazy, and I am not a liar. She stole my son. I believed her. Every word of it rang with the terrible, undeniable sound of truth. The story fit together perfectly. Sharon the nurse, the missing records, the sudden appearance of a baby. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. The death certificate, I said. Do you still have it? She nodded, getting up and walking over to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. She pulled out a small metal box and brought it back to the sofa. Inside, yellowed with age, was a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me. It was a death certificate for a baby boy Vance, issued 30 years ago. The cause of death was listed as sudden infant death syndrome. The signing doctor's name was unreadable, a messy scrawl, but the name of the clinic was clear. The Northwood Community Clinic? The same town we were in right now. The clinic was here? I asked, surprised. Yes, Alara said. It was a small place on the edge of town. It has been abandoned for decades now. Something clicked in my mind. The town hall clerk. I know Alara. Sweet woman. Had a hard life. The people in this town knew her. They knew her story. Does anyone else in this town know about this? I asked. A few of the older folks remember the clinic, she said. They remember me losing my baby. They felt sorry for me. But no one knew Sharon. She was not from around here. She only worked at the clinic for a few months, and then she was gone. Right after my Daniel was born. The timing was too perfect. I folded the death certificate carefully and handed it back to her. My mind was made up. This was not a delusion. This was a crime. A 30-year-old crime that had been covered up by lies and intimidation. Alara, I said, looking her directly in the eye. I believe you, and I am going to help you. A wave of relief washed over her face, so powerful it seemed to take all her strength with it. She slumped back against the sofa, covering her face with her hands and sobbing. Not with grief this time, but with the first glimmer of hope she had likely felt in 3 decades. I sat with her for a long time, letting her cry. I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was furious at Sharon, a woman I now saw as a complete monster. I was deeply disappointed in Mark for his blind loyalty and his refusal to even consider the possibility of a different truth. And I was terrified of what would happen when I brought this information back into my new life. But underneath it all, there was a hard, clear sense of purpose. Sharon had not just ruined my wedding day. She had built her entire life on a foundation of lies that had destroyed another woman's world. She had stolen a child, and I was not going to let her get away with it. Before I left, Alara gave me a small, faded photograph. It was of her, a much younger Alara, holding her newborn son in the hospital bed. Her face was glowing with love and happiness. It was the last picture she ever took with him. Keep it, she said. Show it to him. Maybe when he sees it, he will see me. I took the photo and put it in my purse. It felt heavy, like a piece of evidence. I will be in touch, I promised her. Do not worry, we are going to fix this. As I drove away from the small blue house, I felt like a different person than the one who had arrived a few hours earlier. The naive, happy bride was gone. In her place was a woman with a mission. A woman who was about to declare war on her own mother-in-law. When I got back to the hotel, Mark was there, pacing the room just as he had been the night before. His face was a mask of worry and anger. Where have you been? He demanded as I walked in. Your note said you were going for a walk. That was 6 hours ago, Chloe. I was going out of my mind. I needed some time to think, I said, my voice calm and even. I was not ready to tell him where I had been. Not yet. I needed a plan. To think about what? He asked, his voice rising. About that lunatic who ruined our wedding? I told you to drop it. I cannot drop it, Mark, I said, looking him in the eye. There are things you do not know. What things? He scoffed. Things she told you? Did you go find her? Is that where you were? His accusation was so quick, so direct, it caught me off guard. What makes you say that? Because my mother said you would, he yelled. She said that woman was manipulative and that she would try to get into your head. She warned me that you were too trusting. I cannot believe you went behind my back and sought her out. I stared at him, my heart sinking. Sharon was already one step ahead of me. She was poisoning Mark against me, painting me as an unstable, gullible fool. She was using the same tactics on me that she had used on Alara for 30 years. Your mother is the manipulative one, I said, my voice shaking with a sudden rage. She is a liar, Mark. Do not talk about my mother that way, he shouted, his face turning red. She is the victim here. She has been through a terrible ordeal, and instead of supporting her, supporting me, you are taking the side of a crazy stranger. She is not a stranger. Her name is Alara Vance. And she is... I stopped myself. I could not just blurt it out. He would never believe me. Not like this. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. She is what? He challenged. Go on, Chloe. Say it. Tell me the crazy story she spun for you. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. Arguing with him like this was pointless. It was exactly what Sharon wanted. She wanted to drive a wedge between us. I am not going to fight with you, Mark, I said quietly. I am tired. It has been a long day. My sudden change in tone seemed to confuse him. He stared at me for a moment, the anger in his eyes softening slightly into confusion. Chloe, what is going on with you? This is not us. We do not fight like this. I know, I said, my voice heavy with sadness. Let's just not talk about it tonight. Please. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay. We will not. But tomorrow we need to get on the same page. We are a team, remember? I remember, I said. But as I looked at him, at the man I had married just yesterday, I felt a chasm opening between us. We were not a team. He was on his mother's team, and I was on Alara's. That night, I lay in bed, pretending to be asleep. Mark's breathing was deep and even beside me, but my mind was wide awake. I knew what I had to do. I needed to investigate Sharon's past. I needed to find the cracks in her story, and I needed to do it without Mark knowing. My first step was to find out more about the Northwood Community Clinic. I used my phone to search for it online, but as Alara had said, there was very little information. It had closed down in the late 80s. There were no official records available online. I decided to change tactics. I started searching for Sharon's maiden name, which I knew from our wedding invitations. Sharon Peterson. I looked for any connection between that name and the town of Northwood. Nothing came up. It was as if she had never existed there. But Alara had been so sure. She was not from around here. She only worked at the clinic for a few months. That meant she would have been living there temporarily. Maybe she rented an apartment. Maybe she was listed in an old phone directory. The next day, I told Mark I was going to meet Sarah for brunch to decompress after the wedding drama. He seemed relieved that I was doing something normal and did not ask too many questions. But I was not going to see Sarah. I drove straight to the main library in the city. I spent hours in the archives, looking through old microfiches of phone books from Northwood and the surrounding areas from 30 years ago. It was tedious, eye-straining work. Just as I was about to give up, I found it. A listing in the Northwood directory from the year Mark was born. S. Peterson. There was no first name, just an initial. But the address was for a small apartment building right in the center of town. My heart pounded. This was it. This was the first piece of concrete evidence that placed Sharon in that town at that exact time. I took a picture of the directory page with my phone. Now I had to figure out what to do with this information. I could show it to Mark, but he would probably just say it was a coincidence. There are probably lots of S. Petersons in the world, Chloe. I could hear his dismissive tone in my head. I needed more. I needed something that directly linked her to the clinic. I thought about what Alara had said. The doctor who ran the clinic had disappeared. What was his name? I called Alara from a library payphone, not wanting to use my cell. Alara, it is Chloe, I said. Do you remember the name of the doctor at the clinic? Dr. Albright. She said without hesitation. Arthur Albright. I will never forget his name. I thanked her and hung up. I went back to the archives and started searching for Dr. Arthur Albright. This time, I found something much more quickly. A series of newspaper articles from a few years after Mark was born. The headlines were shocking. Local doctor accused of fraud. Albright Clinic under investigation. Dr. skips town amidst allegations of illegal adoptions. My hands were shaking as I read the articles. Dr. Albright had been running an illegal adoption ring. He was preying on young, single mothers. He would tell them their babies had died at birth, and then he would sell the infants to desperate couples for cash. He had created fake death certificates and fake birth certificates to cover his tracks. The articles mentioned that he had at least one accomplice, a nurse, but she had never been identified. He had fled before he could be arrested and was never found. This was it. This was the whole story. Sharon was not just a nurse who worked there. She was his accomplice. She had not just stolen Alara's baby. She had bought him. Or perhaps she had taken him as her payment for helping Albright commit his crimes. I felt sick to my stomach. Mark was not just a stolen child. He was a victim of a black market baby ring, and the woman he called his mother was a criminal. I printed copies of all the articles. I now had proof that Sharon was in Northwood when Mark was born, and I had proof that the clinic where she worked was the center of an illegal adoption scheme that matched Alara's story perfectly. This was more than a bad feeling now. This was a conspiracy. I knew I could not confront Mark with this yet. He was too deep in denial, too brainwashed by Sharon. I needed to talk to someone else in the family first, someone who might be more open to the truth. My thoughts immediately went to Robert, Mark's father. He was always so quiet, so nervous, especially around Sharon. He seemed completely dominated by her. At the wedding, when Alara made her accusation, his first instinct was not to get angry, but to look terrified. He was the one who had torn up the note with Alara's address. Why? Was he just protecting his wife, or was he protecting their shared secret? I had to find out. I decided to approach him when Sharon was not around. I called Mark and asked what his plans were for the day. He said his mother was feeling overwhelmed, and he was taking her out for a spa day to help her relax. It was the perfect opportunity. I drove to their house, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The articles and the directory page were in a folder on the passenger seat. Robert answered the door. He looked surprised to see me. "Chloe," he said, his eyes darting around nervously. "What are you doing here? I thought you were with Sarah." "I need to talk to you, Robert," I said, my voice firm. "Alone." He seemed to shrink under my gaze. He glanced back into the house as if expecting Sharon to materialize out of thin air. "She is not here," he stammered. "She is out with Mark." "I know," I said. "That is why I am here. Can I come in?" He hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside. I walked into the house I had visited so many times before, but it felt different now. It felt like a crime scene. The walls seemed to be saturated with 30 years of lies. We sat down in the formal living room, a space that was always kept perfectly clean and was rarely used. Robert perched on the edge of an armchair, wringing his hands. "What is this about?" he asked, avoiding my eyes. I did not waste any time. I opened the folder and laid the first document on the coffee table between us. It was the copy of the phone book page. "This is from the Northwood phone directory, the year Mark was born," I said, my voice level. "It lists an S, Peterson living in an apartment there. Sharon's maiden name was Peterson, was it not?" Robert stared at the paper, his face pale. He did not say anything. I placed the second set of documents on the table. The newspaper articles about Dr. Albright and the illegal adoption ring. I pushed them toward him. And these are articles about the clinic in Northwood, I continued. The one where Sharon used to work. The one that was shut down for selling babies. I watched him closely. His eyes scanned the headlines, and a flicker of something, maybe recognition, maybe fear, crossed his face. He started to sweat. I do not know what this is, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. This has nothing to do with us. Does it not? I pressed. Alara Vance said her baby was stolen from that clinic by a nurse named Sharon. The timing, the location, the story. It all lines up, Robert. Too perfectly to be a coincidence. He shook his head, looking trapped. She is a sick woman. Sharon told you. She makes things up. Then explain the phone book, I said. Explain why Sharon was living in that small town for a few months, right when her son was supposedly born, and then never mentioned it again. Explain why she worked at a clinic run by a known criminal who specialized in faking infant deaths. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at the papers on the table, his composure crumbling. I decided to push harder. You and Sharon have no pictures of her pregnant, do you? I asked. It was a guess, a shot in the dark, but it felt right. There are no baby shower photos, no pictures of her in the hospital with a newborn Mark. All the photos start when he is already a few months old. I had noticed this before, subconsciously. Their family albums were strangely empty of the usual newborn photos. At the time, I had just assumed they were not big on taking pictures. Now, I suspected a much darker reason. Robert's face crumpled. The question had hit its mark. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, cornered fear. You do not understand, he whispered, his voice trembling. She could not have children. We tried for years. It was breaking her. She was not well. She said she had a solution. A private adoption. The confession hung in the air between us. It was not a full confession, but it was a crack. A huge crack in the wall of lies they had built for 3 decades. A private adoption through Dr. Albright? I asked quietly. He flinched at the name. She handled everything. She told me not to ask questions. She said it was better that way. She came home one day with a baby, with Mark. She told me he was ours now. She had a birth certificate. It all looked official. But you knew, did not you? I said, my voice hard. You knew it was not legal. You suspected where he came from. Tears started to roll down his cheeks. I did not want to know, he confessed, his voice choked with shame. I was scared of her. I was scared of losing him. I loved him from the first moment I saw him. He was my son. I did not care how we got him. I just wanted to be a father. I stared at him, a wave of pity mixed with disgust washing over me. He was a weak man, a man who had allowed his wife's desperation and criminality to rule his life. He had lived a lie for 30 years, and in doing so, he had enabled a terrible crime. You tore up Alara's address at the wedding, I said. You stopped her from contacting me. He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Sharon told me to. She said we had to contain it. She said you would be a problem. She said you were too smart, too curious. So Sharon knew I was a threat from the very beginning. She had underestimated me, but she had not been wrong to be worried. Robert, I said, my tone softening slightly. Mark deserves to know the truth, and Alara deserves her son. You have to help me. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. I cannot. You do not know what she is like. She would destroy me. She would destroy all of us. She is going to destroy all of you anyway when this comes out, I countered. And it will come out. I am not going to stop until it does. You have a choice. You can either be the man who helped cover up a crime, or you can be the man who finally did the right thing. He stared at the articles on the table, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. I could see the battle raging within him. The fear of his wife versus the weight of his conscience. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "I want you to tell Mark the truth," I said. "Or if you cannot do that, I want you to back me up when I tell him." He shook his head frantically. "No, not yet. He is not ready. It would destroy him. We need more time. We need more proof." It was a stall tactic, but I understood his fear. And maybe he was right. Maybe what I had was not enough to overcome 30 years of brainwashing. Mark's entire identity was tied to being Sharon's son. Tearing that down would require an atomic bomb of evidence, not just a few old newspaper clippings. "What kind of proof, Robert?" I asked. "What would be enough?" He thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. "The hospital records," he said. "Sharon always said Mark was born at St. Jude's Hospital in the city. The birth certificate she has says so. If you could prove he was never there, if you could prove that birth certificate is a fake, then maybe that would be enough." It was a concrete goal. A piece of evidence that could not be explained away. A direct contradiction of Sharon's official story. "Okay," I said, gathering up my papers. "I will get the records." I stood up to leave. As I reached the door, Robert called out to me. "Chloe," he said, his voice still shaky. "Be careful. She watches everything. If she finds out what you are doing—" He did not need to finish the sentence. I knew what Sharon was capable of. She had stolen a baby. She would not hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened to expose her. "I will be careful," I said. I left their house feeling both victorious and terrified. I had confirmed the truth. I had found an unwilling accomplice. But I had also been warned. Sharon was on high alert. This was now a dangerous game of cat and mouse. And I had no doubt that she would be a ruthless opponent. Getting hospital records from 30 years ago was not going to be easy, especially since I was not a direct family member. I knew I could not just walk into St. Jude's and ask for them. I needed a different approach. My first thought was to hire a private investigator, but that was expensive and risky. If Sharon found out, it would be all over. I had to do this myself, and I had to do it discreetly. I started by calling the hospital's records department and pretending to be a researcher working on a project about birth rates in the 80s. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. All records were confidential. I would need a court order to access them. It was a dead end. I felt a surge of frustration. I was so close. But the final piece of the puzzle was locked away behind a wall of bureaucracy. I decided to go back to Sarah. She was the only person I could trust completely. I met her for coffee, and this time it was not a lie. I laid out everything I had found. The phone book, the articles, my conversation with Robert. She listened, her eyes growing wider with each new detail. "Chloe, this is insane," she said when I was finished. "This is like something out of a movie. A really dark, terrifying movie." "I know," I said. "And now I am stuck. I need to prove Mark was never a patient at St. Jude's, but I cannot get the records." Sarah tapped her chin, thinking. "My cousin Jessica," she said slowly. "She is a paralegal at a family law firm. They deal with things like this all the time. Paternity cases, adoption records. Maybe she would know a way." It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. "Can you ask her?" I begged. "But you have to be careful. You cannot use my real name or Mark's." "Of course," Sarah promised. "I will be discreet. I will just say it is for a friend." 2 days later, Sarah called me back. Her voice was full of excitement. "Okay, I have a crazy idea," she said. "Jessica said that while official records are sealed, hospitals often have other, less official records that are not as protected. Things like volunteer logs, visitor sign-in sheets, gift shop receipts. They are usually stored in deep archives and nobody ever looks at them." "How does that help me?" I asked. "Well," she said, If Sharon really gave birth at St. Jude's, she would have been there for at least a couple of days. She would have had visitors. Robert would have been there. Maybe other family members. Their names might be on a visitor log for the maternity ward from that specific week. And if her name is not there? I prompted. Then it is not definitive proof, but it is another piece of evidence that her story does not add up, Sarah explained. But here is the really interesting part. Jessica said that sometimes in cases of fraud, people create fake documents but make small mistakes. They might get the date wrong or misspell a name or list a doctor who was not on staff at that time. That was it. That was the angle I needed. The birth certificate Robert had mentioned. Sharon had one. If it was a forgery, it might have a flaw. I need to see that birth certificate, I said, my mind racing. How are you going to do that? Sarah asked. It is not like you can just ask Sharon to show it to you. No, I said, but I know where she keeps it. I remembered once, a few months before the wedding, Sharon had been helping us with some paperwork for our marriage license. She had needed Mark's birth certificate and had retrieved it from a small fireproof safe in her home office. I had watched her punch in the code. I had not been paying close attention, but I remembered it was short. A 4-digit code. I asked Mark about it casually a few days later. Hey, I was thinking about getting a small safe for our important documents, I said. Like the one your mom has. Do you remember what she uses for the code? Like, is it a birthday or something? He shrugged. I think it is my birthday, he said. Month and day. She is sentimental like that. My heart leaped. I knew his birthday. Of course I knew his birthday. Now I just needed another opportunity to get into their house alone. It came a week later. Mark told me he was going on a weekend fishing trip with Robert and a few of his uncles. It was an annual tradition. Sharon always stayed home, but this time she had other plans. My sister in Philadelphia is not doing well, she told me over the phone, her voice laced with false concern. I need to go be with her for a few days. I will be leaving the same time as the boys. The house would be empty for an entire weekend. It was the perfect chance. I told her I was sorry to hear about her sister and wished her a safe trip. The lie came easily to my lips. I was getting good at it. The day they all left, I waited for a few hours, just to be sure they were gone. Then I drove to their house. I still had a key from when I used to water their plants for them. My hand was shaking as I unlocked the front door. The house was silent. It felt eerie, like I was breaking in. But I pushed the feeling down. I was not a thief. I was a truth seeker. I went straight to the home office. The small black safe was on a shelf in the closet, just as I remembered. I took a deep breath and punched in the 4 digits of Mark's birthday. The safe beeped and the small green light came on. It was open. My hands trembled as I reached inside. There was a stack of documents, passports, social security cards, and a thick envelope labeled Mark's papers. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was his original birth certificate. I took it out and spread it on the desk. It looked official. It had the seal of the state. It listed St. Jude's Hospital as the place of birth. It listed Sharon and Robert as the parents. It listed a Dr. Michael Chen as the attending physician. I took pictures of it from every angle with my phone. Then I looked closer, searching for a mistake, a flaw. That is when I saw it. The name of the doctor, Michael Chen. I had a vague memory of Mark mentioning him once. He was their family doctor, the one Mark had been seeing since he was a child. I quickly did a search on my phone for Dr. Michael Chen. I found his practice online. His biography said he had been a doctor for over 30 years. I clicked on his professional credentials. It listed his medical school, his residency, and the date he started his practice in our city. It was 5 years after Mark was born. My breath caught in my throat. It was the mistake. The fatal flaw. 30 years ago, when Sharon had this document forged, she had used the name of a doctor she knew and trusted, not realizing that one day it would be easy for someone to look up his work history. Dr. Chen could not have signed Mark's birth certificate because he was not even practicing in this state yet. He was probably still in his medical residency 1,000 miles away. The birth certificate was a fake. I had her. I finally had the undeniable proof that Robert said I needed. I carefully put the document back in the envelope, placed it in the safe, and locked it. I left the house, my heart pounding with a wild, triumphant energy. The lies were about to come crashing down. I spent the rest of the weekend planning. I could not just show this to Mark. He would still be defensive. He would probably accuse me of breaking into his parents' house, which I had. I needed to present this in a way that was impossible to deny. I needed to control the narrative. I decided to call a family meeting. Not a big one. Just the key players. Me, Mark, Sharon, and Robert. And I was going to have a surprise guest. Ilara. I called Robert first. I have the proof, I told him, my voice steady. The birth certificate is a forgery. I need you to be on my side when I tell Mark. I heard him take a shaky breath on the other end of the line. How did you— It does not matter how. I cut him off. What matters is what you are going to do now. Are you going to keep protecting her? Or are you going to help your son? There was a long silence. I could hear the silent struggle. Okay, he finally whispered. Okay, Chloe, I will be there. Good, I said. I am setting up a dinner at our apartment on Sunday night after you all get back. Just the four of us. Tell Sharon it is a late wedding celebration. A chance for us to connect after the drama. She will be suspicious, he warned. Let her be, I said. Just make sure she comes. Next, I called Ilara. I told her what I had found and what I was planning. She was terrified but resolute. I will be there, she said, her voice filled with a strength I had not heard before. I have waited 30 years for this. I am not afraid anymore. I told her to arrive an hour after the others, to wait for my signal. The day of the dinner, I was a nervous wreck. I cooked a simple meal, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the knife. Mark came home from his trip in a good mood. The time away with his dad seemed to have calmed him down. He was apologetic about our fight. I am sorry, Chloe, he said, wrapping his arms around me. I have been under so much stress. I should not have yelled at you. I just want us to move past all this. I know, I said, leaning into him. I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do. I was going to shatter his world. But it was a world built on lies. He deserved the truth no matter how much it hurt. Sharon and Robert arrived at 7. Sharon was all smiles, carrying a bottle of expensive wine. She complimented our apartment, my cooking, my dress. It was a masterful performance of a loving mother-in-law. Robert, on the other hand, looked like he was about to be sick. He could not meet my eyes. We sat down for dinner. The conversation was stilted and awkward. Sharon did most of the talking, telling stories about Mark as a child. Each story was like a knife in my heart, knowing it was all a lie. Finally, after we had finished eating, I decided it was time. I am glad we could all do this, I began, my voice trembling slightly. Because there is something we need to discuss. Sharon's smile tightened. Mark looked at me, confused. What is it, Chloe? I looked at Robert. It was his chance to step up. He looked at me, then at his wife, then down at his plate. He remained silent. He was too weak. I would have to do this alone. It is about the woman at the wedding, I said. Ilara Vance. Mark groaned. Chloe, I thought we agreed not to talk about this. We did not agree, I said firmly. You told me to drop it, but I could not. Because she was telling the truth. Sharon let out a short, sharp laugh. Oh, honey, you are still on this? I told Mark you were impressionable. That poor woman has gotten to you. She did not get to me, I said, my voice rising. The facts got to me. The facts that you have been hiding for 30 years. I stood up and went to my purse. I pulled out my phone and the copies of the newspaper articles. I laid the articles on the table first. This is from the Northwood Chronicle, I said. It is about the clinic where you used to work, Sharon. The one run by Dr. Albright, who was selling babies. Sharon's face went pale. I do not know what you are talking about. Do you not? I asked. Your maiden name was Peterson, an S. Peterson was listed as living in Northwood the year Mark was born. A strange coincidence. Is it not? This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice losing its smooth edge. Mark, your wife is hysterical. Mark looked from me to his mother, his face a mask of confusion. Chloe, what is this? Where did you get this? I have been doing some research, I said, because your mother's story did not add up. And I found something else, something you cannot deny. I pulled up the photo of the birth certificate on my phone. I enlarged the section with the doctor's name and the date. This is Mark's birth certificate, I said, holding the phone out for everyone to see. It says he was born at St. Jude's Hospital. It says the attending physician was Dr. Michael Chen. Mark nodded. Yes. So? So, I said, my voice ringing with triumph. I looked up Dr. Chen. He is a real doctor. He is your doctor now. But 30 years ago, he was not. 30 years ago, he was in his residency in another state. He did not start practicing here until 5 years after you were born. I let the words sink in. The room was completely silent. Mark stared at the phone, then at his mother. The confusion on his face was slowly being replaced by a dawning horror. Mom? He said, his voice a small, broken whisper. What is she talking about? Sharon stared at me, her eyes filled with a pure, cold hatred. The mask was gone. The elegant, charming woman had vanished. In her place was a cornered animal. She is lying, she hissed. She faked that. She is trying to tear our family apart. Am I? I challenged. Then show us the original. It is in the safe in your office, is it not? The code is Mark's birthday. Let's go get it right now and compare. The blood drained from her face. She knew I had her. I had seen the real document. I knew the flaw was there. This is insane, she sputtered, standing up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. I will not be subjected to this interrogation. Robert, we are leaving. But Robert did not move. He was staring at his wife, and for the first time there was no fear in his eyes. Only a deep, profound sadness. Is it true, Sharon? He asked, his voice heavy. The doctor? Was it all a lie? Do not be a fool, Robert, she snarled. Answer him, Mom, Mark said, his voice shaking. He was on his feet now, his eyes wide with disbelief and pain. Just tell me it is not true. Tell me she is lying. Sharon looked at her son, at the life she had built, and she seemed to make a decision. She squared her shoulders, her expression hardening into a mask of defiance. So what if it is? She said, her voice dripping with venom. What if I did what I had to do to get you? I gave you a wonderful life. A life that woman could never have given you. I loved you. I was a good mother to you. The confession, so blatant and unapologetic, sucked all the air out of the room. Mark staggered back as if he had been physically struck. He sank into his chair, his head in his hands. No, he whispered. No, no, no. Robert finally broke. He let out a sob, a raw, ragged sound of a man broken by decades of guilt. I am so sorry, Mark, he cried. I am so sorry. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Sharon, Mark, and Robert all looked up, startled. I walked calmly to the door. That must be our other guest, I said. I opened the door. Elara Vance was standing there, her hands clasped in front of her, her face pale but determined. She looked past me, her eyes finding Mark. Hello, Daniel, she said softly. The chaos that followed was a storm of raw emotion. Mark looked from Elara to Sharon, his face a canvas of pain and confusion. Sharon erupted in a fury, screaming at me, calling me a homewrecker, a monster. She lunged at Alara, but Robert, in a surprising show of strength, grabbed her arm and held her back. "Enough, Sharon," he yelled, his voice cracking. "It is over. No more lies." I stood back, letting the scene unfold. This was not my fight anymore. It was theirs. It was the messy, painful collision of 30 years of secrets and lies. Mark finally stood up. He walked slowly toward Alara, his movements stiff. Like a man in a dream. He looked at her face. Really looked at her for the first time. He saw the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth. He saw himself. I took the small, faded photograph Alara had given me out of my pocket. I held it out to him. "She gave me this," I said. "It is you. The day you were born." He took the photo, his hand trembling. He stared at the image of the young, happy woman holding her newborn son. He looked from the photo to Alara's face, then back again. Tears began to stream down his face. He did not say anything. He just looked at this woman, this stranger who was his mother, and he wept. He wept for the life he never knew, for the mother he never had, and for the lie he had been living. Alara took a hesitant step forward and reached out, her hand hovering in the air, not daring to touch him. "My boy," she whispered. "My sweet, sweet boy." The aftermath was long and difficult. The police were eventually called. Sharon was arrested. With Robert's testimony and the evidence I had gathered, the case against her was strong. She was charged with kidnapping and fraud. The story of the Northwood Community Clinic was reopened, and a new investigation began into Dr. Albright's crimes. Sharon's name was now linked to him forever. Robert, for his part as an accessory, faced legal consequences as well, though his cooperation earned him a much lighter sentence. He lost his home, his reputation, and the family he had tried so desperately to hold together with silence. My marriage to Mark was pushed to the absolute brink. The revelation shattered him. For weeks, he barely spoke. He was a ghost in our apartment, haunted by the truth. He was angry with me for blowing up his world, but he also knew, deep down, that I had done it for him, for the truth. We started going to therapy, both individually and together. It was a slow, painful process of rebuilding. He had to mourn the loss of the parents he thought he had, and he had to navigate the strange, new reality of getting to know his biological mother. Alara was patient. She did not push. She gave him space, sending him letters and old photographs, letting him come to her in his own time. Slowly, tentatively, they began to build a relationship. He learned that his name, Daniel, meant "God is my judge." It was a name she had chosen with love and hope. He started to use it. The journey was far from over. Our lives were forever changed. The perfect wedding day had been a lie, the beginning of a nightmare. But out of the wreckage, something real and true was beginning to grow. One evening, months later, Daniel, as I was now learning to call him, turned to me. We were sitting on the sofa, the same one where I had first sat with Alara. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I know it was hard. I know I was awful to you. But thank you for not letting it go. Thank you for fighting for the truth. You saved me." I took his hand. The chasm between us was finally starting to close. "I love you," I said. "That is all that ever mattered." Sharon's reign was over. Her perfect life, built on a stolen child, had been dismantled by the truth. She had tried to make me small, to dismiss me, to silence me. But in the end, her lies were no match for a woman who refused to look away. She had toasted to her son, but she had lost him forever. And Alara, after 30 years of heartbreak, finally had her Daniel back. The cost had been high, but the truth, I realized, was always worth the price.